Welcome to the podcast Film Pros and Average Joes, where we talk about all things movies, from in-depth theoretical analyses to easy-to-follow discussions on the entertainment industry. This podcast is run by the Shenandoah Film Collaborative, a nonprofit based in Strasburg, Virginia, that strives to educate, entertain, and inspire artists, and those just learning about independent film. For more information on what our organization does, visit us on our website at strasburgfilm.com. On today's episode, our hosts Michaela and Alex will talk about the pros and cons of numerical film ratings, from Rotten Tomatoes to Netflix algorithms, and ask the common question, who should we trust, the critics or the fans?
It's just like the good old days.
Just like a regular
yesterday.
we're being watched and recorded this time, right? It's like totally fine.
No pressure.
I guess I also realized that just now that this topic that we're discussing is probably the perfect topic for this podcast, Film Pros and Average Joes, kind of the critics versus audience, which is kind of our biggest talking point today in terms of the ratings, right? The audience scores and the critics scores. So I was going to ask, would you consider yourself a film pro or an average Joe?
I am the average Joe in this situation for sure. Yes, when Holly did the introduction, I was like, oh, that's me. I'm the average Joe.
Well, I was trying to think about it. I was like, where do I place in that? I was like, maybe aspiring film pro, which I guess is like most people, right?
Yeah.
It's like we can't discount that I'm probably an average Joe in this situation too, but aspiring film pro. I'm happy with that title. And that's why we're doing this podcast, right? Because we want to be film pros. And
Yeah.
hopefully our listeners do too. So
all right. Well, hi guys. I'm Michaela and I am with the Shenandoah Film Collaborative. I am a marketing writer. And I also help with the podcasts, so I'm happy to be doing that.
Also proud average Joe, as you just said.
Yes, and a proud average Joe.
Okay, great. And I'm Alex Eggersdorfer. I'm one of the international cinema specialist interns here at Shenandoah. I write about German cinema. I'm currently attending film school still and hoping to go into film writing and film theory soon enough. And I would consider myself proud, like I said, aspiring film pro. So let's talk about that. So what makes a film pro? What is this score? This weird score that we're talking about, this Rotten Tomatoes score, 60%, 75%, 32%. This is the film pro score. What does that even mean? Is this the grade? Is this the consensus? If you love a movie and it has a 16%, does that mean it's failed? What does that mean, Michaela? Tell us.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, pre-COVID, I think I would kind of look at a film that I wanted to watch and I would see the Rotten Tomatoes score and I would be like, oh, it got 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. Or you hear, oh, it got this score on Rotten Tomatoes. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to waste my time with that. And that's kind of how I felt, especially when you're, paying for a movie or doing that kind of thing. You consider whether or not you want to spend your time with the movie. And so ratings played a big factor into that. Now, post-COVID, I have everything at my fingertips. I'm kind of nestled here in my den and watching what I want to watch. And if it's not good, I will turn it off and on to the next one.
Right. Well, I think it's also like I find myself doing the same thing maybe when I was before COVID, which has been a year now. And I think this year has really had some major ramifications in terms of how we look at scores and how we view content. But
absolutely,
I think for me, it's kind of that the ratings are a way of guiding, right? They have been when we're really busy, when we're doing our daily things, when we're not at home all the time and have the capabilities to just kind of, not all of us do even when we're at home, but like when we're at home and we have time and we can invest into some content, then we usually have a little bit more leeway as to like, okay, it doesn't have the best ratings. I'll give it a shot anyway because I have the time on my hands. It's like these ratings in a way are trying to guarantee that you like it. People who don't have that much time, they don't want to be disappointed, right? They want to have something they can rely on. And so therefore they turn to these voices. And instead, the Rotten Tomatoes score as such is also another distillation of that, right? Where it's not necessarily the voices that we're listening, it's just a number that we're looking at. And I think that's something that people have needed. But then again, as we've all realized, sometimes we don't agree with those scores, and they aren't necessarily a fail-safe solution. And especially with the audience scores, well, they're so divided, right? It's so difficult to even say, where you fall in that. Sometimes it's this way, sometimes it's that way. What are audiences looking for? What are critics looking for? And I think that's what we're trying to get at in this podcast episode, right? Where it's like we're trying to detail, what is the Rotten Tomatoes score? What is its value? How does it differ from the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes? What are these audiences looking for? What are the critics looking for? What are audiences looking for? Why is there this disconnect? And how has that changed during COVID? And also how this has basically given rise for streaming services to come up with their own rating systems that are trying to once again guarantee satisfaction with the content you're consuming, right? Where it's not necessarily a critic's consensus anymore in terms of a numerical kind of a signifier, but rather it is a match, right? Netflix has this match score where it's like, oh, this matches 96% to your tastes. Guaranteed, you will love it. Like, there's no doubt about it. And there's this algorithm that basically tries to do what you're doing with navigating the scores. But anyway, I think we should start with some of the basics, which is Rotten Tomatoes, right? What is that score? What is that? Do you want to kind of give us a rundown of what that score comprises?
Yeah. So, well, we've got Rotten and Fresh, and it's basically based off of critics and, film pros such as yourself and average Joe like me. So you kind of have the audience scores where they say, hey, I really like this, and the critics scores where they say, hey, I really like this. And sometimes they agree to disagree. So there are, go ahead.
Well, it's not even like the thing is, it's not even necessarily consensus, right? It's just like if it has a 31% critic score, that simply means that 31% of critics enjoyed it, right? And it's
yes,
I guess it's the 69% of critics. Yes, it is 69% of critics that didn't enjoy it, right?
yeah.
And it just means if you fall into the category that does like it, you're in the minority of the critic. It's not that everybody unanimously hates it and gives it a failing
This
score.
isn't a grade.
This isn't like oh, it's 30% good,
Yeah.
It's really strange to see people talk about, hey, oh, this shouldn't have gotten this score. It should have gotten this score. That score is too low. That score is too high. That's really strange to think about because you're almost like kind of aligning it with a grade you would get on a paper, right? Oh, you got a 52 on a paper. Like, it's not the same thing. It actually just means that there's actually an audience out there that did enjoy your content.
Well, and I think that there's a misconception with that because a lot of people do see it as a grade. Most definitely. I mean, again, when people talk and they discuss movies, they're like, oh, you don't want to watch that because that did get a 16% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Right.
And
I think, and I think like the way it's also structured, the 60% kind of like cutoff mark, where it's like, oh, if it's 60% or higher, it's fresh, and below that, it's rotten. It's kind of, again, it's reminiscent of like getting graded at school where you're like, a 60 is like the cutoff for like a D minus, right? It's not quite an F, which would be like a 59. That would be a failure. 60% would be a D minus, but they're not synonymous and they cannot necessarily be compared, right? But again, that kind of raises the question, and I think we've both had experiences with this where it's like, we love a movie or we really disliked a film, right? And we go onto Rotten Tomatoes to view the score, and we are offended. We are personally attacked if we loved it and it has a 10%, or if we hated it and it has a 99%,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think when you watch a movie and you like it, it kind of either it hits close to home or you see some familiarities in that, and you definitely like want other people to like it too. So I feel like, you have this passion, you're so passionate about it, and then when you see that it gets a score, you're kind of appalled because you liked it and you expect other people to like it.
Right. And I think that's where it also comes into play. And you see this a lot in like the comments section of a place like Rotten Tomatoes, especially in the audience comments, where it's like people will band together, right? If a film has terrible critic scores, but audiences seem to really respond to it, they'll kind of unanimously come to the conclusion. Critics don't know what they're talking about. They don't even know anything about movies. This is what great film is, I don't know what they're thinking, blah, blah, blah. And they find a sense of community in this audience score where it's like, again, critics have given it a bad review. I'm going to go watch that one because that means it's good, because the critics don't know what they're talking about, right? And I think it's the same thing happens on the critics side, which is also like an elitism of sorts, where it's kind of like, this will please this and this audience, right? This will check the boxes for blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. But this is not art, right? Which is, again, it's really difficult conversation to have, because sometimes, a lot of films are made for very specific audiences, and sometimes they cross boundaries, right? And they reach audiences that maybe they weren't targeted towards, right? And when that happens, there's this weird kind of, you're not in on the joke, let's say, right? Where it has certain references or certain history, or it's following a certain film tradition that suddenly seems kind of alien. And I think a lot of the time when people have that reaction and say like, oh my gosh, I feel offended, like I just feel attacked, like this can't be, and then they angrily write a comment, or critics angrily write a review. How do people like this? Why can't people see through this, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I think critics are also kind of looking for maybe something a little bit different than
exactly. Yeah, it's
that average viewer is. I think critics are looking for a little more Charleston.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is, like, to be a film critic on a site like this, you have to be writing for a publication, right? You actually have to be within the kind of film writing industry, or at least like in the cultural industry. Sometimes it's not necessarily just film magazines that are have writers on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, so if you're on Rotten Tomatoes, you have to, if you're a critic, you have to be associated with some part of the film industry. And if you are a audience member, this is something you can just sign up and add your score. But again, critics are a part of the film industry.
Right. And the thing is, with the critics, it's, to be a writer, to be writing for a publication of a stature that allows you to have a place on Rotten Tomatoes, usually those writers, this is not always the case, but usually the writers will have gone to maybe film school, maybe they did media studies, cultural studies, they maybe studied film history. There's a different context that they're approaching all of these films with. So they're kind of like viewing it through the lens of film trends and how aesthetics have changed, how certain topics have been handled throughout film history across the globe, right? And most of the time, this is I think where the biggest disconnect comes from. It's like most of the time people are not necessarily interested in analyzing every little piece of every little film they watch, right? They just want to watch something at the end of the day that's going to bring them entertainment, that's going to bring them laughs, some comfort, right? And usually I think, at least this is my experience with the film writers and filmmakers that I've talked to, it's, film is a vital medium of art that's supposed to push us forward, that's supposed to contemplate our surroundings, our social environment, right? And it's supposed to be in tune with what is happening and not just stagnate, but actually provide societal progress and engage with the world. Whereas, that is kind of irreconcilable with it's just a dumb action movie. I just want to enjoy it. I thought it was great. The villain was there, the protagonist, the antagonist, the love interest, blah, blah, blah. We have all the key parts. It works on screen, special effects, awesome, right? And there's nothing to say against that, but then critics are forced to go and write about these films. And what are they going to say? Like, oh, I loved it. If they are of a completely different mindset and have a totally different kind of like view on what film should be contributing necessarily, right?
Yeah, well, when I watch a comedy, I mean, it's not like I want to look for anything deep either. It's just I turn on a comedy because I want to laugh. I want to chuckle. I mean, it's pretty surface level. When you see comedy, you expect to laugh.
Well, and that's another thing where we were talking recently about 50 First Dates by Adam Sandler, right? Yeah. And how a lot of people still really enjoy that film, but it's gotten, a lot of flack, and it did not get good reviews when it came out. And, because it also highlights the problematics kind of like that arise in that film of like manipulating people with mental disorders and lying to them. And it's kind of wrapping all of that up in a nice cutesy kind of romantic comedy bow, and most people aren't necessarily, again, a lot of people love this movie. I know you love this movie, right?
I do. And it's not, again, I think my reason for loving it is very surface level. Like when you discuss like, basically blindsiding somebody with a mental disability and lying to them and all of that. That's definitely not okay. In the movie, it's like portrayed in this really cute way where this guy would go to the ends of the earth for this girl who has this mental disability, and it's so cute because he just like is willing to make his life that much tougher to try and make her life that much greater.
Right.
And so that's what I love about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's also, again, where it comes from. It's like, you're viewing this simply as a film, right? This has no necessarily like this doesn't necessarily have a tie to our world, right? It doesn't reflect our reality. It is just a romantic comedy that is on screen, meant to be enjoyed, blah blah blah. But again, if we take that kind of viewpoint of the critic, and in seeing how the representation of people with mental disorders is on screen, and how that normalizes a certain way of treating these people, neuroatypical people, and I think that's where a lot of the kind of tension arises, right? Where it's like,
and I completely understand that if you apply that to the real world, like that, I mean, if that showed up in the news, people would be outraged.
But then again, actually, now that you bring this up, it's a matter of escapism, right? Where it's like, are people looking for escapism, or or are they trying to actually watch something that has some kind of again relatability to a real kind of real world context, which I think a lot of critics are looking for, right? Where it's like escapism only is a way of like distracting from what's actually happening around us. Like people with mental neuroatypical people are treated differently. They are treated poorly in our society, right? And if we see this kind of romanticization of this man manipulating, and it's also supposed to come across as really cute and romantic, right? It kind of justifies a weird behavior on behalf of the neurotypical person, the viewer that's probably going to be watching this film. But anyway, I think that's where that kind of not seeing eye to eye comes from, right? How we view films, how they're supposed to impact society or not impact society, right?
Yeah. Well, when we were talking about it too, honestly, like I didn't even think like anything of it until you mentioned it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you are so totally right. I think you going to film school, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to place you in the critic category.
Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, just you have the knowledge and the whereabouts. And there's another film that we were kind of talking about that critics really liked, that audiences didn't like, that we'll get into in just a second. But when you kind of spoke on this, I was like, wow, yeah, I didn't even realize that. And now that you mentioned it, I'm like, yeah, that is not okay.
Right. And that's another thing where it's like, you putting me in the critic category, I think that's interesting because it's like, yes, I tend to side with the critics consensus usually, right? If something gets a pretty good score, that's usually, not exclusively, that is not a rule like it doesn't always happen. There's many films that I dislike that critics have loved. But it's weird to find yourself in watching films, in curating your own tastes, right? To see where you kind of fall into this like landscape of like a billion voices, right? And I think it's interesting how a score will then prompt someone to go and read about these films, right? If something has a bad review, you know, or a bad score, they'll scroll down and see all the critics' scores, right? And kind of try to understand where this critique is coming from. And this ties back into us, you know, feeling some kind of like emotional reaction when a film we love is not loved, you know? It's kind of what am I not seeing? We don't want to be out of the loop, right? We want to feel like we know what we're watching, we understand, we comprehend. Same thing goes with when something gets a good review and you hated it. It's like, what am I missing? You know, what am I not seeing? Why am I out of the loop? You want to be part of that conversation, and being in a minority of something does not feel good necessarily always, right? I think it's really important to find comfort in being in part of the minority and voicing your own opinion and actually putting that into words. What are you necessarily looking for in your cinema, away from one score or the other? I think that's what it comes down to. And I think that's what's so wonderful about being able for audiences to be able to sign on and voice their opinions, right? And these critics also to have these links to longer reviews. People can not just rely on a number that basically is just so reductive to everything that is around this film, which is a discourse, which is a conversation. You know, it's about
movies even
taste.
advertise. So for like Rotten Tomatoes, they're like, oh, we got
Exactly.
this score on Rotten Tomatoes. And people are like, oh, this is going to be so good because we got a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yep, and you see it in the trailers before the films even come out, right? It's like 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Go see. It's like, that's insane, right? Because you don't know what that 100% even connotes, right? You don't even know what these critics are saying, what the audiences are saying, whatever, right? It's like, it's just a number. It doesn't tell you anything really, but it's become such a powerful thing where it's like, even if you're like on physical copies of media or digital things, it's like you see the fresh Rotten Tomatoes sticker, right? They even have Rotten Tomatoes certified now, which is like a tomato in little gold kind of ring to signify it's like over 75%. You know, it's not just fresh, but it's ultra fresh, right? It's ridiculous. It's like this weird tier system. And it can really make or break a film, right? If people won't go see a film if it has like a 10%, right? And it's going to impact their box office. It's going to impact also voice, you know, audiences. Like if you know a film has terrible reviews, but you go see it anyway, you're a little skeptical already, right? Oh, I don't know about this, right? And you go in and you already have a sort of like a perspective shift where you're not necessarily open-minded, but you're just kind of like, this is bad reviews, and you're trying to understand why it has such bad reviews. Maybe you read some of these reviews before coming to the theater, right? And it's a really interesting kind of system to kind of, it's like a yardstick where you're always measuring yourself to this thing, this weird number, this signifier. Anyway, I feel like I'm repeating myself. But let's actually talk about this experience. Last night, I think you watched a film that I really wanted you to see. This kind of ties into 50 First Dates, also an Adam Sandler film, Punch Drunk Love. Tell me about your experience with Punch Drunk Love.
Yes. So I was a little hesitant in the beginning.
Right.
With the opening scene where this guy is just sitting in this room talking about coupons, and I'm like, oh man. But as the film progressed, in the beginning I'm like, this is gonna be so slow. But as the film progressed, I really loved it. You know, I dare I say it is my new favorite.
Wow.
I loved it so much, and I liked it a lot for I think the cinematography and the sounds. So when this man is experiencing something uncomfortable, they do a really good job of making you uncomfortable with the sounds and everything else that's going on, and so you can feel this uncomfortableness that this gentleman is going through, and it's just so amazing. I don't know. I really liked it.
I am so glad you liked it, because I think this kind of, you liking this actually kind of like proves our point a little bit, where it's like, I think before the last time we talked, it was you loved 50 First Dates, and you did not like Uncut Gems, right? You could not stand that film.
Well, yeah,
Um,
30
and,
minutes in and I just shut it off, and I was
right.
like,
And that's an
this is
interesting thing,
not done.
because it's like that those two films kind of like show the kind of like audience critic tension, right? Where it's like with 50 First Dates, audiences really loved it, critics hated it. You see that reflected in the scores. Uncut Gems, audiences were not down for it, critics absolutely adored it. And there was a really big tension. It's also, I think, Adam Sandler, he has this history.
He's a typecast. Like, he is
He's been
comedic.
typecast,
When I
right?
turn on
People are
Adam Sandler,
expecting.
I expect to laugh 100%. That's just the way that he was in the 90s, in the early thousands. And so when I turn him on, I want to laugh. And when he plays something so serious, it's very interesting, because then I, think back to 50 First Dates and Waterboy and all of these other movies that he has done. And he just doesn't seem to fit the role for me.
Well, and I think like the entire idea of like having the score basically guarantee your satisfaction, having the actor guarantee your satisfaction. If you see an Adam Sandler film come out, you see a trailer for it, the audiences, given their experiences with his films, are kind of already attuned to what they're about to get, right? So going in, they're happy, and I think the score is trying to do the same thing, where it's like it's trying to guarantee that you're not wasting your time. And with Uncut Gems, I think it's interesting because it's like, it's this weird mix of two worlds, because you have the Safdie brothers, who have been kind of in the art house scene for a while with Heaven Knows What and Good Time, and they've established quite a reputation with those films, but they weren't mainstream features by a long shot. People were not necessarily watching these films. Maybe more Good Time because Robert Pattinson was in it. But then you have Uncut Gems, which was their biggest project to date, possibly also their most ambitious. And then you have Adam Sandler, a figure that people know, and no studio is going to have a film with Adam Sandler and not advertise it. They're going to try to get as much out of it as possible. And it's not even necessarily a concern of whether audiences are going to be satisfied with what they're going to see, and then when critics loved it, Adam Sandler, people are going to give it a shot. It's like has a 90% on or whatever on Rotten Tomatoes. We're going to go see it. And there's this terrible disconnect. Anyway, coming back to Punch Drunk Love, you being in this camp of like not loving Uncut Gems, but loving 50 First Dates. And I'm kind of the opposite of I did not enjoy 50 First Dates, but I could get down with Uncut Gems. Punch Drunk Love is an example, again, of a film that was kind of known for its controversy in subverting audiences' expectations of what an Adam Sandler film is, right? And it still does to this day, right? A lot of people, when they watch it, I have some wonderful Rotten Tomatoes audience reviews pulled up actually of the film, which I think are really interesting.
Oh, yes. Okay,
let me actually read some of these. All 1-star reviews, obviously. Okay, so the film was not fun to watch. I was surprised and disappointed, as I was looking forward to enjoy oddball situations and unusual characters. Not just slow, not just awkward, but the most grindingly so. What else do we have here? We have incredibly pretentious. Adam Sandler shines in new directions as an actor, but the overall feel of the movie is that of an overlong critique to the rom-com characters he usually plays. Another is so effing strange, but I guess uplifting that even weirdos can find love, right? Stupid, boring, and goes absolutely nowhere. And I think this Punch Drunk Love is an example of, I showed this film to a lot of people in the past few years because I absolutely adore it, right? So I would show it to a lot of my friends who were not into film at all, who were actually big fans of films like 50 First Dates or I don't even know the other films, like The Water Boy or Happy Gilmore, things of that
Yeah.
nature. Just go with it. They, you know. And I showed them this film, and it was really interesting because while we were watching it, it was just complete silence, right? No comments, no nothing, right? And then was over. I've had this happen 2 or 3 times. The reaction will just be like, "What was that? Like that was just weird. Like I don't know what I was watching. Right? This was terrible." And I thought it was really interesting because it's like, maybe they were expecting something else. Maybe they were expecting a romantic comedy with Adam Sandler, and what did they get? They got a Paul Thomas Anderson film about the
I think
trains
it's
of
really
love.
good
Yeah,
though. Yeah.
yeah,
I think you still get those like they throw you quite a few bones in there of that, humor and comedy. And I think it's I would say a good transition film into maybe Adam Sandler's more serious films.
right. And I think for a while he wasn't doing work like that, and I think Uncut Gems again was a reprise. Right, it was like we're coming back to this. Adam Sandler is in his first big major serious role since Punch Drunk Love. And again, critics were attuned to that, right? Critics have been on that for a while. And it was, again, following this tradition within contemporary film history of this actor having done this wonderful film and is now coming back to his kind of more art house side, which he already had established some contact in earlier in his career. Whereas audiences that hadn't maybe seen Punch Drunk Love and they only knew him as the one thing. And now Uncut Gems is getting more mainstream kind of awareness, and it's just this odd disconnect. And I think again, this ties back to our point: what are you looking for in a film? Are you looking
Yeah.
for this weird kind of meta thing of like, oh, this actor in this role means this and this within this context, and this film means this within the filmmaker's filmography, like the Safdie brothers. This kind of like, you see this very obvious trend in their work, and it's kind of all reaching its apotheosis in Uncut Gems. And then we have this Adam Sandler. It's a perfect vehicle for cinephiles and critics to kind of like fawn over, right? It's like, oh, we love it. And this anxiety inducing kind of cinema that also is is like usually lauded, right? Within critics and professional film circles, and then you have the audiences which are not attuned. And again, I think that comes back to what these films are, where these films are positioned, right? Where are we actually marketing them towards? Is this film made for mainstream audiences? Uncut Gems made for mainstream audiences, right? That are not necessarily looking for this. I don't know. I think films are made for everyone. Obviously, people can watch what they like. But it's almost like you need a primer to enjoy it.
That. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's not, when I was watching it, it's not that I was expecting. I kind of knew it was going to be a serious movie. I thought that I was going to be thrown a little, of those comedic bones. But again, I wasn't, and I have no knowledge of the producers at hand. So I think the people who knew of the producers kind of expected the film to be what it is. Whereas
Absolutely.
me, I'm more familiar with Adam Sandler. Mm-hmm. And so I honestly didn't know what to expect, but I didn't like it, clearly, because I didn't make it even 30 minutes in.
Right. And I think this kind of like ties into our next topic, where it's kind of the audience distrust in the critics score, right? And the critics kind of contempt for the audience score as being less than, as being uninformed, this kind of elitism that comes about it. And Uncut Gems is a great example where we have a lot of audience reviews of like, once again, critics don't know what they're talking about, right? I know what I like. I can figure this out. This is a terrible film. Critics, I don't know what you're on about. They obviously have no idea about what film is. And I think this brings up the great point of how our relationship to these scores has also changed during the last year, during COVID, right? Where we're all kind of like anchored to our living rooms and bedrooms in front of our laptops and screens, and we have a little bit more time to invest and explore. So how is you mentioned you have this was kind of like the time where you started looking away from scores and looking more inwards towards what your tastes are, what your preferences are.
Yeah.
So what's your experience there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say now, before I was talking about like Rotten Tomatoes and how Rotten Tomatoes is everything and that score determines whether or not I would watch a film. But now it's just, it doesn't mean anything. I mean, we have so many films at our fingertips that I am now just watching what I'm interested in, what I feel like watching. If I want to watch a comedy, I turn on a comedy. If I want to watch something more serious, I watch something more serious. You know, it used to be that it was just Netflix for a streaming service, and now we have all of these streaming services with these a bunch of different originals and stuff. And you know, also more native things that you can watch. And so I mean, if I don't like it, I'll turn it off, like Uncut Gems. I'm no harm, no foul.
Right. And I think, that brings up the great point of this also being an economic issue, right? Where it's like it actually has to do with the need for the score is a way to, once again, try to reassure audiences that what they're investing, if they go to a theater before theaters closed, before they go and spend $10 to $20 on a movie ticket, right? To make sure that what they're investing in is of quality, right? Because they've been shown too many terrible films. It's like, it's too often that people go to the theater under the promise that it's going to be a great film, and it's just they totally dislike it. And I think that's where the tension also comes around, where it's like, yes, it gets a good score, trying to guarantee that you're investing your money wisely, but then maybe you don't agree with the consensus that brought you there in the first place. And like you said, I think having these things at our fingertips, it being accessible, it being quote unquote free once you pay the subscription price, right? It gives you more leeway, where it's like you can give more things chances. You can take that risk. If something has a great
if I'm
review,
interested in something new, then I definitely turn it on. And if I don't like it, then I don't watch it. But if I like it, then it opens up this whole new realm of things I could be watching.
Right. And I've had it multiple times. My parents are not film people the way I am. They watch a lot of films, but there's multiple times we'll hear about a film that's gotten wonderful reviews. It's played at a bunch of festivals, blah, blah, blah. And they would not have taken the time to go see it in a theater, but since it's sitting on Amazon Prime, Hulu, Netflix, whatever the service is, they'll be like, oh, okay, I guess we have an hour and a half. Let's give it a shot, And I think that's also a great way of, like you said, opening up those boundaries, where it's like, if it's like the pros and cons of the streaming service, where it's like, possibly the filmmakers are not making as much money on their art, right? Maybe they're not making back what they put in. But at the same time, they might be reaching a much larger audience. But again, I think this ties into how that might be undermined by these new rating systems and these new algorithms that these streaming services have kind of established on their own. Specifically the new Netflix rating system, with the matches. I think that kind of complicates everything. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, it is very interesting because it started with kind of like a thumbs up, thumbs down, people liked this certain percentage. And now it's like this curates to me based on what I've watched, 88%. And so Netflix wants to make that guarantee that you're going to like it. It just reassures you that you're going to like it. So if I click on, a film that's 88%, chances are Netflix thinks I'm going to like it.
Right. They use the same percentage logic that Rotten Tomatoes uses, but instead of it being, again, this weird kind of tension between, oh, this is the critics that are giving it this score, right? This sometimes perceived as elitist group. It's now taking that away, and it's completely catered to you. It's all about you. The individualism kind of like it's rampant. It's not about what anybody else thinks. We're using this algorithm. We're using your tastes, the things you've given us, the information you've given us through your streaming habits, to completely tailor make these scores for you. And again, this is only because of this arises out of wanting to guarantee a certain satisfaction, because people just don't have the time, right? There's so
Yeah.
much content. It's such a content overload. I have so many things that I'm never going to get to because I just do not have the time. I cannot tell you how long the list is of things that I need to watch and or that I want to watch. I don't necessarily need to, but
I think also Netflix, it's a good marketing strategy as well for them to
yes,
not only cater to you, but cater their originals, cater what they want you to see to you.
Yep. It's really strange because the streaming service is supposed to be the space of a little bit more, like a little bit of a liberating space for these films, right? Where it's like, hey, someone's going to click on Uncut Gems or Punch Drunk Love, you know, maybe it's on there and they'll check it out. And maybe they'll really love it, right? But at the same time, just because these things are on there, the Netflix algorithm and Netflix is kind of is kind of like feeding into the kind of like boxing people into certain categories, which may or may not be good, right? It's really difficult to tell because it'll weed out everything that they think won't appeal to you and just give you exactly maybe what they're making, their Netflix originals that caters to your tastes, right? That's
Yeah.
probably, I can't guarantee this, but I'm sure that's how Netflix makes their decisions on what to invest in, right? Where it's kind of like they see who's watching what's being successful. If it's not one of their projects, they'll make something similar to those projects as their Netflix original, and that'll will pop up at the top of your queue or
Well, it
whatnot.
also raises the question of, does it limit that branching out factor?
Exactly.
When you know, have something that's so curated to you and they cut all these other films out that you might not be interested in. But then again, you're living that busy lifestyle and you want to click on something that you might like. Does it limit your, you know, want to branch out, or does it, you know, limit that curiosity that you could be having?
Well, I think we're also seeing that in the content that Netflix actually ends up making, right? Where it's like they're using the scores obviously to guarantee kind of convince you that they're guaranteeing some sort of likability for you and that it's for you. But at the same time, they're also looking at shows that can be remade, right? We're seeing this huge trend of nostalgia and remakes of 90s TV shows that were huge successes, right? Where it's like, it's gone past, you know, the scores are one thing, but audiences have realized, I think even these streaming services and even maybe Rotten Tomatoes has realized that people have gone past that, right? It's beyond the score at this point, where it's people have either learned to trust it or distrust it, and it's just not a way of guiding anymore. So now the content itself becomes the guarantee, right? Where it's like, oh, we're going to do a remake of Gilmore Girls, or we're going to do another Sex and the City, or we're going to do another Friends, you know?
Yeah.
All of these things where it's like, it's a really weird thing where it's like this constant need for reassurance in a time where there's too much, right? And there's so much precarity and there's so much insecurity. This score becomes both a thing that people need. They feel like, oh my gosh, like I need something to kind of identify with, right? It's like this score is attached to this. We need to condense this film down as much as possible, and that ends up being a number, right? It's just a numerical kind of signifier. But now it's like that's not even enough. Now we need to condense new options of filmmaking. It's the streaming services that are both that could provide a new array of content, right? But instead, they are using algorithms in terms of scores to whittle down. And also then they're also in the content they're making, they're using that kind of whittled down kind of center of content that people will return to, and then remaking it a billion times, you know, and that's it. So I think there's this weird kind of dichotomy of both the possibilities that the streaming services provide and also the limitations they impose, because they're so afraid of losing that viewership.
Well, that's how they make their money, is subscribers and promising, you know, remakes of films, and it's not even necessarily that the remakes are going to do well, but by the time it's all advertised and they've launched all these, different items and have all these marketing strategies, it's already been paid for. The actor,
Yes.
the film, everything. So it doesn't even matter whether or not the remake's good.
And people are going to watch it
Yep, and you're
no
going to
matter
get
what.
subscribers, and it doesn't matter.
People like fans of Friends are going to watch the new Friends show if it's terrible or not terrible, simply out of curiosity and the need for more of what they already love, right?
Yeah.
That's
Well,
the
we
end
like
of the line.
familiarity. We like, being cozy and thinking about a time when,
Right.
pre-COVID, we like to kind of cling to that.
And I think this actually kind of comes full circle to what the critics may be looking for and what audiences are looking for, right? Where it's like critics are seeing film as a way to reflect the world, society, how we can move forward. It's supposed to provide new perspectives, new ways of looking at things, way to progress as a society, show us a new emancipations and liberations, right, in whatever form they may take.
Yeah, it's not a grade.
Right.
It's not a grade, and it's something that you should be able to take, and I wouldn't run with it, but keep it as a note.
I think they're fighting that a little bit. They're fighting maybe the streaming services just making the same things again and again, and also like running into milking kind of real issues such as 50 First Dates. They're using this example of a neuroatypical person and they're plugging it into the romantic comedy formula. And I think that's what maybe critics are fighting against, where it's like, no, it's not about comfort. It's not about just giving you more of the same, because then we reach this state of just pure standstill, right? Just complete stagnation. And I think that's what's so concerning for a lot of critics too, where it's like, we need to be moving forward in some way, right? Whatever that may be.
Yeah.
But that also requires an openness of the audience. And again, how much films and content actually influence our society, influence our day-to-day is another question, right? And then it comes back to, what are you looking for in your content? Are you looking for escape? Are you looking for consolation? Are you looking for catharsis? Or are you looking to kind of like enrich your kind of like day-to-day, gain a new perspective, see something, see the world from a way you've never seen it before, right? And I think that will actually remain the tension forever. Well, at least for a while, right? It's how are we going to please audiences that view films and TV shows as a form of catharsis and winding down and just kind of coming back to something that they can rely on, and how and the perspective that films should be something that move us outside of our comfort zones to keep us growing, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that is a good question for our audiences is, what are you guys looking for in your films? And when you look at a film or you go into Rotten Tomatoes, do you guys side with the critics or the audience?
Right.
I mean, we would love to hear and get reports back, because it is a very interesting topic and how things have moved and evolved.
I'd also be interested to hear people's experiences of how they believe these streaming services to cater to their tastes in terms of these scores, right? Do these scores, when you see something pop up on your Netflix queue and it says 99% match, is it truly a 99% match, or are you hoping for something new? I'd be really curious about that. But speaking about opening up to things that are weeded out through algorithms, I think that's what we're also trying to do here at the Shenandoah Film Collaborative. In our blog posts, we have I'm one of the writers. I write about German cinema, but we have people writing about Japanese cinema, South American cinema, and also underseen American cinema in the Film Analysts. And I think that's one of the wonderful things, where it's like, yes, these films would get so easily weeded out of any algorithm for anyone, basically, because they are so niche. They fit into no genre. They fit into no easily identifiable box. But they exist, and they could really be a film that resonates, right, and opens your perspective. And I think these blog posts, hearing and reading about these films and how they're analyzed and the perspective that they're approached with, I think is a really wonderful resource. And we're turning back to, we're not necessarily, I wouldn't even say it's film criticism, right? It's just kind of like a film discussion that's open-ended. It's not saying that this film is good and this film is bad, but it's like this film exists, and this
You're
is
opening
where
up you're opening up the
opening up,
discussion
right?
for the people
Exactly.
to talk about and branch out and experience these
Right.
films that you might have not have heard of, and
Right.
discuss why you might have liked it or maybe disliked it.
And as much as these algorithm scores, little numerical representations of the content, try to whittle down your experience of what you view as content, I think words, writing, everything, if you have those resources and see new perspectives that are not necessarily tied to those institutions, I think provides a really great way of discovering new content that doesn't that would never reach you in the state of I don't know, like this reductionism that we're seeing everywhere. But anyway, that is just my take. That actually,
That's important, to be able to branch out and kind of explore new genres and decide what you like and what you don't like.
right. And that's not to belittle anyone who really does use film as an escape or as a way to kind of
Absolutely, I do.
at the end of the day, to unwind. You need that show that you've seen a billion times, or you want to see that romantic comedy that's come out that just kind of is maybe a remake, maybe something that you've seen before, but it does provide, it checks those boxes for you, right? And it's not necessarily that's being condemned as like, oh, well, that's questionable that it checks all the boxes for you. No, that's not the case. I would kind of like open up that discussion about fulfilling criteria in a more democratic sense, where it's like everyone has their own kind of constellations of criteria that they would like a film to fulfill, right? And one isn't necessarily better than the other, right? It's like this huge web of things that people are looking for, and everybody has their own constellations. And it's really difficult when you have like these scores that are trying to impose set constellations onto your constellation, and you're trying to kind of align with it, but you don't really get it, blah, blah, blah.
And I think a good takeaway from this is do what fits with you, do what you think is best for you. If you want to branch out and make that research and go ahead and, find new films, do that. And if you are, you want to get that rom-com feel good and pick with something that's a little more curated to you because that's what you're looking for, then do that.
Right.
And that's why, we're here today, talking about Rotten Tomatoes and kind of debunking all these things that, people might assume about these certain platforms is a means to help people, branch out or stay within the zone that they're comfortable with. I mean, it's all up to you.
Right. It's also a wonderful excuse to promote one of my favorite movies, Punch Drunk Love. So go watch that too.
Yeah, I second that. That is actually new favorite. Go watch Punch Drunk Love.
Yes, that is our film recommendation. Like it or hate it, it doesn't really matter. It has to work for you. So let us know, and then let us also know, again, about what you're looking for and how these algorithms kind of either work for you or don't, and how these numbers, what kind of value they even hold in your life, if any, and even if they're necessary in the future, if they can be done away with and words are enough. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to the Film Pros and Average Joes podcast, the Shenandoah Film Collaborative. And again, check out our blog posts. You might discover a film or two that you hadn't heard of that might interest you. And then be sure to check out our other podcast episodes. There's a bunch more to come, also more on film criticism and specifics, not just in ratings, which will be exciting. And yeah, we'll hope you'll join us. Thank you.